Hello everyone, this is Jacob Popia, the producer of The Apex. This week, Jan is sitting down with Mr. Jordan McKelley, the host of the podcast Run the Globe. They are reviewing the book The Last Lecture by Randy Paucsch. Please subscribe and hope this pushes you toward your apex. And if you wish to join the JJD Thoughts family, please visit www.patreon.com/The Apex Podcast.
Welcome to JJD Thoughts Podcast, The Apex. This is going to be a little bit of a different style of episode. Now that we're a couple of episodes deep, something that I've been getting requests for since even before we started officially recording the podcasts were book reviews. People always ask me, what books do you read? Why do you read them? How do you interpret books that you read? And try to figure out like what my system is to either highlighting things that I try to pick out of books and ways that I can apply those lessons to life. So I figured the best way to do that would be to just talk about books. And something that I always like to do when I read books or when I talk about them is always have somebody else's opinion on them. Because I firmly believe that regardless of who the person is, it could be a complete stranger, it could be a best friend, it could be a parent. If you open your mind to what somebody else's opinions are on the exact same line that you just read, they could look at it from a completely different angle than you did, because everybody's life experiences are different and their worldviews are going to be completely shaped by what their experiences were leading up to that day. So today, as a guest reviewer, which will be kind of a trend with these book reviews, is having a secondary person walking through the book with me. Today's guest reviewer is a guy that I just met not too long ago, but we hit it off pretty much right off the bat. We met through a mutual connection of another friend, but the first time we actually physically met in person, we spent probably 2.5 hours talking without even realizing it. And it really facilitated, hey, this would be cool. Like if we can have this conversation about random stuff for multiple hours and not even realize it, we're probably going to be relatively good at piecing together these books. So without further ado, I would like to welcome the host of Run the Globe Podcast, Mr. Jordan McKelley.
What's going on, my man?
Welcome to the show, my brother.
Oh, dude, it's good to be here. I'm excited. I mean, I kind of like podcasts just a little bit, so this isn't
I never would have guessed.
This isn't out of my comfort zone. If I'm not, recording my own podcast, I'm probably listening to someone else's podcast.
Right.
So this is, this is like right in my alley because this is actually the first book I read from front to back. So this is perfect. I'm really, really excited about this. Also, I mean, you value some of the same things I value. So, it's going to be fun to have intelligent conversations. Plus, you're going to have a lot of different views than what I have. So I love diving into some of this stuff because there's so much deeper meanings behind a lot of what we're going to go over today. And hopefully a lot of people don't see it the way we do. That way they can pick something up.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I 100% encourage fan interaction. I mean, if you hear this and there's something that you want to say that you picked out that we didn't necessarily pick out, feel free to send us a message. jjdthoughts@gmail.com, Facebook, Instagram, DM me, whatever. I'd love to hear what that feedback is because that does nothing but help me learn. And we really have 3 people in the room with us.
We do.
We've got me, we've got you, and we have Randy. So
Randy's a good dude.
Yeah. So the book that we're reviewing today is called The Last Lecture. It's written by a guy named Randy Paucsch, and he was a professor at Carnegie Mellon and the University of Virginia. And he specialized in computer science and virtual reality. But he ended up getting stage 4 pancreatic cancer, which for those of you that don't know, in the medical community is basically a 6-month to a year death sentence.
Yeah.
It acts very, very quickly. It metastasizes very quickly, which means that it spreads through the body very fast. And he decided that with those months that he had left to live, he was going to compile many of the lessons that he learned throughout his life and the dreams that he achieved into one book, which actually is based off of a lecture that he gave at Carnegie Mellon if you want to watch that lecture, I 100% like
it's incredible.
You need to watch it. We'll post the YouTube link in the description of the podcast. But outside of just having us interpret the book, you need to see how he delivers it, because he does not deliver it like a dying man.
It's impeccable
at all.
It's literally impeccable.
It is beautiful, beautiful delivery.
Yeah.
So with that, let's go to the book.
Let's do it.
Start right off with the introduction. So he starts off the first line, I have an engineering problem. While for the most part I'm in terrific physical shape, I have 10 tumors in my liver, and I have only a few months left to live. Wow. I mean, right there. Just...
It's pretty...
kind of just sets the tone. I mean, your lens for the rest of the book is just... Wow. Like, he took the time with months left to live to put this together.
Usually people just shut down right after they they throw their problem out there.
Yeah, you hear that news, and it's impossible to not feel that emotional burden. I mean, obviously, I've never felt that before. You know what I mean? No. I can't even imagine what that would feel like.
We certainly can't empathize. We can sympathize, obviously, with it, but we certainly can't empathize. Oh, man. I've gotten my appendix out before, and people felt bad for me. Can you imagine having 10 tumors and telling people that you have stage 4 pancreatic cancer, which is some of the worst? I mean, not that there's a good cancer or bad cancer, right?
Right.
Really dumb to say. But, I mean, that's one of the worst forms of cancer you can get.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the fastest acting, you know what I mean, in the human body. For males, it's just death.
You got to catch it really quick. And even people who catch it really quick, they don't make it.
Right. Yeah. And it's rough. There's not a whole lot of ways to treat it either. So back to the book. He says, we knew right from the start, none of this is a replacement for a living parent. He's talking about the lectures in the book here. But engineering isn't about perfect solutions. It's about doing the best you can with limited resources. Both the lecture and this book are my attempts to do exactly that. So acknowledging the fact that nothing can be perfect, I think that he did a relatively good job of putting together like the perfect book.
Yeah, and the perfect lecture.
Right.
For people who don't know, usually at the end of a lot of professors, their stint at a university, they have that last lecture, right? A lot of universities do this where, I've taught at Walsh for 45 years, and now I'm going to do one last lecture to a group of students. And so it's crazy that, we're introducing this book, and this is literally his last lecture, not because he wants to stop teaching, but because this is literally the first time he'll have an opportunity to spread his ideas. Right. And really enable people to go after, their dreams as well. So this is literally his last lecture, but this is something that's very, it's common at any university with a professor who is ending their teaching or education career.
Right.
So I think that's important to note that a lot of universities do have that. So, but back to the book.
So the first chapter, he is titled "An Injured Lion Still Wants to Roar." And that first line, I think, just kind of, just the introduction to the chapter is just, even when you're down, like people seem to think that people that are sick or people that are dying or people that are in bad situations still don't have, it's almost like their mentality is self-inflicted. But sometimes, or a lot of the time, people want to fight, people have that, they still want to roar, right? Even the injured lion wants to roar, and that's what he kind of talks about in this chapter. The first couple of pages of this chapter is basically just him talking about what Jordan just talked about, what the last lecture actually is, that it's a common practice at other universities and stuff. So I'm not going to reiterate that.
Sorry about that. I jumped a little ahead.
Yeah. So moving into here on page 9, which is about 2-3 pages into that chapter, one of the things that I have highlighted is he's talking to his wife about his rationale to wanting to give the lecture, because really, his wife wants him to dedicate as much time as he has left to spending with her and the kids. And he says, one thing I've learned, and this is the book, I told Jay, is that when parents tell children things, it doesn't hurt to get some external validation. If I can get an audience to laugh and clap at the right time, maybe that would give added gravitas to what I'm telling the kids. Just that little extra oomph is what he's looking for, as far as he really, I mean, spoiler alert, right? At the end of the book, he says, hey, I wrote this as a last lecture, but this is really like a field manual for my kids. I wanted to impart as many lessons as possible that I wasn't going to be able to teach them because I'm going to be gone.
Yeah.
That's a crazy feeling. You know what I mean?
I can't imagine having that feeling, but especially if you're his wife, Jay. You know, even if you gave me that rationale as Randy, I would still have a hard time taking that, internalizing it, and coming out with that perspective.
Right.
Just because you have multiple kids, and his wife is his best friend. And why are you spending time working on on this last lecture or trying to put together, a book when you only have so much time left?
Right. It's a finite resource.
Yeah, I think that really puts the gravity of the value he really thought that he could bring to people even after his death.
Right. He was trying to create a legacy, what I mean, with this book. And so back to the book, he says, what makes me unique? Cancer doesn't make me unique. There was no arguing that. More than 37,000 Americans a year are diagnosed with pancreatic cancer alone. I thought hard about how I defined myself as a teacher, a computer scientist, a husband, a father, a son, a friend, a brother, a mentor to my students. Those were all roles I valued. But did any of those roles really set me apart? Sometimes I think that we focus too much on the position that people have and less about who they are. I actually just posted about that not too long ago.
I saw that.
And it's, you put these people into a niche because, they're a professor, or they're an NBA athlete, or they're an NFL athlete, or they're a runner, they're a power lifter. I know people in the workout communities do that all the time. They're like,
all the time.
That's a bodybuilder. Or, that guy's a CrossFitter. Mm-hmm. Or that guy's a runner, he can't lift. Or that guy's a lifter, he can't run.
All the time.
Which, I mean, it's easy for people in the fitness community to kind of stereotype those people. And that's why I'm like, I don't really, like, I lift sometimes like a bodybuilder, sometimes like a power lifter. I box, I run, I swim. Like, I kind of do everything because I hate fitting into one of those little niche categories.
But you really could do anything if you wanted to.
If you put your mind to it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
People don't think I'm strong. I was with my older cousin last night. He's 260, 6'5", and he was joking around with me. Boy. And I put him on the ground. Like, you don't think I'm strong? I flip tires that are 450. I only weigh 140, but you have no idea.
Yeah.
So it's...
Well, and that's almost better. You kind of want to be undercover.
I know.
It's like, people...
No one knows.
Nobody would see this coming.
Sometimes I want people to know just so I don't have to deal with that. I don't like confrontation. I don't like any of that stuff. But it was fun picking up my cousin and dropping him.
Right.
But back to the book. And
so he says, he asks himself, what do I do alone truly have to offer? Whatever my accomplishments, all of the things I loved were rooted in the dreams and goals I had as a child, and in the ways that I had managed to fulfill almost all of them. My uniqueness, I realized, came in the specifics of all the dreams, from incredibly meaningful to decidedly quirky, that defined my 46 years of life. My apologies for the delay, I wrote. Let's call it really achieving your childhood dreams. And that's kind of how he reached the title for his lectures, right? Was just, this is what I wanted to say. This is me achieving my childhood dreams. And one of the notes that I wrote down in here is I call it something that I call the principle of nothing, where it's basically the universe, right? Whether you're atheistic, you're Christian, you're Jewish, you're Muslim, whatever, right? We all believe that, the universe at some point wasn't really anything and then came into existence.
For sure.
Whether you believe in creationism, you believe in evolution, you believe in the Big Bang Theory.
Doesn't matter.
There was some type of origin point, right? And before the universe was something, it had to be nothing, okay? And everybody looks at that nothing and they think, that nothing is useless, right? But nothing I actually kind of adapted this idea from Jordan Peterson, who's somebody that I really, really encourage people to listen to.
Really intelligent guy.
Yeah. If you want to feel stupid, listen to Jordan Peterson for a little bit, and I promise you'll feel dumb while you're listening to him, but then after you're done, you'll feel smarter.
Yeah.
For lack of even if you just like osmose some of the information into your brain. But if you take that nothing, right? That nothing just stands for limitless potential. Okay, because it became everything. Something has to be nothing in order to become something first. Yeah. Right? And this principle here, where it's just achieving your childhood dreams, when you're a kid, I'm not saying you're nothing, but I'm saying that you haven't had any limitations put on your brain yet, right? That's why kids have such awesome creative imaginations. And they can believe that they can be an astronaut. They believe that they can be a doctor. They believe that they can be this. And then through life experience after life experience, you put that cap a little bit above and then a little bit lower and a little bit lower and a little bit lower. And then all of a sudden, your dreams are now that big. When you were made from nothing. At one point, you didn't exist, and then you came into existence, right? Yeah. So you were formed from that limitless potential. And you had that limitless potential until at 6 years old or something like that, you started realizing maybe I can't do that. Or if I jump off the table, I can't fly. And you start learning those little lessons. And then
for sure,
you get into your teenage years and stuff gets really weird. And then
really weird.
Yeah, you can't. And then you don't know which way is up for a little while. And your dreams end up becoming that big.
Yeah.
But you were made to have dreams this big. So just keep that. And this book kind of outlines that, where it's just, in 46 years, I was able to accomplish a lot of my childhood dreams, right? And he talks about it. But, all right, you go ahead. You can have chapter 2.
Giddy up. My life in a laptop. How exactly do you catalog your childhood dreams? So when you read through this section of the book, not just chapter 2, but the section of the book, he has a lot of childhood dreams.
Yeah, agreed.
He has a lot of them. There's not that many people who have one dream, period. And he has several childhood dreams.
Agreed.
Multiple, right? And just some of the notes that I had from chapter 2, because chapter 2 he talks about being a visual thinker. Mm-hmm. All right? And it's also the chapter where he talks with Jay about this book, correct?
Right.
And you touched on this a little already about her not wanting him to do this, period. Mm-hmm. Right? My biggest takeaway, just reading this, and I'll kind of relate this to the running world, just so people can see a different perspective, is and this has nothing to do with Randy. I think we can take an important lesson from his wife. He is going to do this last lecture. Mm-hmm. He's going to do it. He decides he's going to do it. And at first, she doesn't want to come. She doesn't want to come. It's his best friend, right? But she doesn't want to come. It's like that parent in high school whose son is 110 pounds wet, like soaking wet, but he plays football. And she has to come on Friday night to support him, but she really doesn't want to, because what's going to happen if my baby gets hit? Mm-hmm. He gets carted away. And he is already an injured lion from chapter 1, right? He's injured. And think about a parent in the stands. You're nervous to go, and you don't know if they're going to be injured at all. Mm-hmm. Uncertainty is scary, right?
Right.
But certainty can also be scary. And I think people forget that. And she is certain that her husband's going to die, and she's certain that he only has so much time left to spend with their kids and with her. And for her to go to that lecture and experience what he's about to do could really, I think the way she was processing it, and the reason she didn't want to go is, I think 10 years, 5 years down the road, I feel like that was going to bring up bad memories for her, but she decided to show up anyways. She flies there, right?
Right.
She flies there, and she shows up, and I think there's something to be said about just showing up sometimes, because you're not always going to feel like doing something. You're not always going to feel like supporting your mom or your dad or your son or your daughter, but sometimes you just need to show up. And that's my biggest takeaway was just sometimes you've got to show up.
100% agreed. Yeah, and one of the lines that kind of, pushes that through is just, he was asking her, and this is in the book, he said, I kept saying, I want you there. And the truth was I desperately needed her there. And so eventually she agreed to fly to Pittsburgh on the morning of the talk. And that's, she just bit the bullet and realized that
she didn't have to.
Yeah, she needed to fly there for his sake, not for hers. Like, it was more to support him, like in one last thing, kind of.
Yeah.
One of the other takeaways that I took from this chapter was, so he, at one point in this chapter, I flashed quickly through my slides, now trimmed to 280. Trimmed to 280 slides. Okay, that's
a lot of slides.
That's death by PowerPoint. That's a lot of slides. And so he keeps going through and he's like, all right, I'm going to keep cutting PowerPoint slides. And eventually he has his buddy Steve kind of audit it. And Steve looks at him and basically says, yeah, this is still too long. And he's like, Steve was like, you should lie down on the office couch for a while. And I did. But I kept my laptop on my belly so I can continue to fiddle. I cut another 60 slides. Right? And then he gets up on stage. And he's like, I roused myself off the couch and I started gathering my props for the walk across campus to the lecture hall. In less than an hour, I'd have to be on the stage. All the way up to being on the stage, he was fine-tuning. And this is a skill that I think that people are afraid of, that the good side of that, right, because everything's kind of a dichotomy. So the good side of that is always be willing to change on short notice and adapt, where you can kind of adapt your final product. Just because it's the day that you're doing something doesn't mean that you can't fine-tune it. It's not set in stone until you start talking. Never. And even when you start talking on the stage, when I gave the graduation speech here at Walsh, some of the stuff that I had written down on my paper is not what came out of my mouth. Just take it where the moment allows you to take it. If you're feeling it, let it out, as long as it's within reason.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So then the bad side of that is at some point you have to just accept the fact that it's time to, like, either crap or get off the pot. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, you just need to... it's not going to be perfect.
Nothing ever
and you
is.
got to start delivering it. So you just have to find that balance. And I think that he did a good job, throughout the whole book, saying, I found the balance. Even though I was cutting slides, I finally made it to the point where I was like, okay, all of the lessons that I wanted to impart are now here.
Yeah.
Right? So after he gets done, he gets on stage, he decides he's going to address the elephant in the room. All right, so this is chapter 3. And in a hall full of about 400 people, he starts off by talking about the emblem kind of on his short sleeve polo, which was an emblem of honor because it was only worn by Walt Disney Imagineers. He was also wearing his oval name badge that said Randy on it, that was given to him when he worked at Disney. And he did that because he attached both of those things to a great time in his life, and he also kind of refers back to Walt Disney, and this is, quote, if you can dream it, you can do it, end quote. That just...
that in itself right there is powerful.
It's huge. And that just... It captures what the entire book is as far as lessons in one line. Because he's talking about achieving your childhood dreams, and he's like, well, Walt Disney told me I could do it, so I did it.
Yeah, and he had conviction about it.
So this is how he starts off. He says, I thanked the audience for coming, cracked a few jokes, and then I said, in case there's anybody who wandered in and doesn't know the backstory, my dad has always taught me that when there's an elephant in the room, introduce it. If you look at my CT scans, there are approximately 10 tumors in my liver. And the doctors told me I have 3 to 6 months of good health left. That was a month ago. So you can do the math. Right off the bat. I let the slide linger so the audience could follow the arrows and count my tumors. All right. I said, that's what it is. We can't change it. We just have to decide how we'll respond. And this is one of my favorite things that he says in these early chapters. We cannot change the cards we are dealt, just how we play the hand. And I think that just hits that entire chapter right there. It's like we could probably spend a good 6 hours on this book because every other line is just like mic drop.
Oh, it is.
Yeah, I mean, like that right there. We cannot change the cards we are dealt, just how we play the hand.
Yeah.
And that's every single chapter in this book. So,
well, this is his life, and I think his life was. I mean, he lived a very powerful.
you can
story.
you can feel the emotion in the words while you're reading it, and especially while he's delivering the lecture. You can just feel the electricity while he's talking about it. And I think that's a big piece of when people ask, "Oh, how do I get better at public speaking?" or "How do I get better at this?" How do I get better at interacting with people? It's let that emotion flow, because if you try to hold it back, then it starts to feel fake.
Mm-hmm. It's not authentic.
And it's not authentic, yeah. And even you can, if you can get it to come across in words and it feel authentic, like when I was reading this, I was wowed by pretty much every chapter. So he moves into, that first section was just him introducing the lecture, right? So this section number 2 is titled, it's the title of his speech, Really Achieving Your Childhood Dreams. Okay, so here's an outline of what his childhood dreams were. Being in zero gravity, playing in the NFL, authoring an article in the World Book Encyclopedia, being Captain Kirk, winning stuffed animals, and being a Disney Imagineer. Why don't you go ahead and talk about the parent lottery?
The parent lottery. This one resonated a lot with me, just because my mom is very much like his parents are, and so is my dad. But my mom in particular, just because one of the lines, he describes his mom, he says, "My mother was a tough, old-school English teacher with nerves of titanium." Nerves of titanium.
Not even steel.
No, nerves.
Boom, titanium.
Yeah. And my mom's not an English teacher at all. In fact, I might get my poor grammar from her. My grammar, like everybody has flaws and strengths, and one of my flaws is grammar. It's horrendous. So maybe her, but she has nerves of titanium. She's a police officer. She's been for 20-something years, and she's very tough, and she ran a really tough household. And his dad, he describes his dad as he was I believe a medic in World War II in Battle of the Bulge.
Yep.
Right. And so in his house, it just wasn't like lollipops. He just, like, if in the modern day, there would probably be no TV in his house.
Yeah.
There'd probably be no TV in his house. Just at all. And so the reason it resonated so well with me is just because his parents set the foundation for him to have this imagination that he has. You know, obviously this section of the book, you just told everybody what his childhood dreams. And his childhood dreams were really made possible by his parents.
Yeah.
Like really made possible by his parents. And I mean, it's not a huge chapter, but he really puts emphasis on this chapter. And he said that there are two types of families: those who need a dictionary to get through dinner, and those who don't.
Yeah, I have that starred and highlighted. I was like, oh man. Mm-hmm. Wow.
I think that drives home my point about they probably wouldn't have a TV.
Oh yeah.
They probably weren't. And I don't really want to, I really want to keep talking about that, but I feel like I'm going to keep going into the other chapters, and I don't want to do that. But did you grow up with parents like Randy's?
Oh yeah, 100%. So one thing that I was actually just talking about with my dad the other day was we were talking about the fact that we wanted to do these book reviews, and how I think that everybody always does nonfiction book reviews, right?
Yeah.
But I grew up reading a lot of fiction. I love mythology. I loved reading like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I was homeschooled, so all I had to do was read. I didn't have a whole lot of friends.
I did not know you were homeschooled.
Yeah, up until 8th grade. So I was homeschooled up until 8th grade, so I just would read all the time. as many books as I could find. We would go to the library probably 2 or 3 times a week, and I'd check out my maximum amount of books that I was allowed to have on my little kitty library card.
So you're a nerd.
Super nerd. I'm still a nerd. I'm still a huge nerd.
I am too. I mean, yeah.
But my dad would always talk about those fictional stories, and he said, hey, like, these might not be real, but the people that wrote them wrote the story so that you could learn a lesson from them, right? And I remember listening to my mom and my dad talk at dinner, and like, what does that word mean? He'd be like, well, go get the thesaurus, go get the dictionary, figure it out. Okay, so I go figure it out, find it, and that's exactly what he says here. If you have a question, this is back to the book. Randy says that his father would say at dinner, if you have a question, then find the answer. And so you would never give them the answer right off the bat. He would force them to go find it. And that fostered an instinct in his house to never just sit around and wander, but open the encyclopedia, open the dictionary, open your mind, find the answer to what is nagging you.
Yeah. And it made him really curious.
Yeah, and that was phenomenal.
Yeah.
For sure. But yeah, my parents were definitely like that growing up.
That's awesome. It's a good thing. A lot of kids ask a lot of questions, and a lot of parents don't like to, and I've watched this, they don't like to answer questions. They also think that when a child asks a question, they're talking back or they're being rude, disrespectful. But I think his parents showed him a different way to look at it, where asking questions means that you want to learn, that you want to grow. And throughout this whole book, you're going to see his personal development as a person.
Oh yeah.
Just not him as him and his education background, but him as a person in all areas. And I think it's really important to continue to ask questions. As long as you're asking them in the right way, when you're asking them to people, it's all about your delivery, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. As long as you can do it tactfully, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's okay to ask questions. And his dad, I mean, kind of always even forms kind of a dichotomy here, where to me it's like, you can ask questions about academia and things that you're curious about, but don't ask questions about why you have to eat the Brussels sprouts that are at dinner. You know what I mean?
Because you're eating them.
Yeah, because you're going to eat them
regardless,
and
it's no salt.
Yeah. I'm going to eat a bowl of nails with no milk.
Do what you got to do.
Yeah, but it's that kind of split where you have to understand, okay, there's some things that you just have to bite the bullet and do, even if you don't want to do them. And then there's other times where you can ask questions and try to understand why.
Absolutely.
I mean, this entire chapter is full of little quotes from his dad. Like over here on page 23, and this is in the book, he says,
some of them down.
just because you're in the driver's seat doesn't mean you have to run people over.
I loved that one. That was
huge.
That was probably my favorite one. I can't believe I didn't write that one down. But when I went over that, I actually stopped and I read that again. A lot of people do that.
Yeah, because it's like just because you're the leader doesn't mean that you need to step on people's toes. I 100% think that I definitely a servant leader, right?
Yeah.
The best way that I think that people can succeed is by getting other people to succeed around them. And I think that if everybody had that mentality, the world would be a way different place. But that basically says in that line, just because you're driving the car doesn't mean that you need to hit the people that are on the sidewalk.
Yeah, because there is a correct way to live. I mean, lead.
You have to drive on the right side of the road if you're in the car. You know what I mean? That's the difference kind of between like the high road and the low road. And that deep down, I think that, in your gut, you know what you should be doing. And when you stray from that, it gets easier and easier every time you stray away from what you know you should be doing to be doing the opposite stuff. But decision after decision either moves you in one direction or the other direction. Which direction do you want to go in?
Absolutely.
And then one last one that I want to talk about from this chapter. And I actually wrote hell yes next to this line. Because for those of you, if this is the first episode that you're listening to, I've got 5 years' time in the Air National Guard. Grew up in an extremely militaristic household. Not necessarily my dad, but my grandfather was a huge influence in my life. He was a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps, fought in Korea, and taught me how to fold the colors, and he was a huge influence in my life growing up. And so on page 24, he says here, when I was studying for my PhD, I took something called the theory qualifier, which I can now definitively say was the second worst thing in my life after chemo, which chemo's pretty awful. So that's got to be pretty high up there as far as things that suck. When I complained to my mother about how hard and awful the test was, she leaned over, patted me on the arm and said, "We know just how you feel, honey. And remember, when your father was your age, he was fighting the Germans.
Oh my gosh.
Boom. Like, mic drop.
Yeah.
Okay. I talk about this in the first episode of the Apex with Colonel Brown, that 16 through 25 and past that, right? But especially like 17, 18, 19, 20, that age group right there. Okay. First world problems is, oh my God, my Wi-Fi went out.
That's so true though.
I can't binge watch The Office. When in, World War I, World War II, Korea, people were forging documents to get into the Corps, to get into the Army, to get into the Army Air Corps at 17 years old so that they could storm the beaches of Normandy.
Isn't that wild?
And fight in the war against the Germans, or go into the Pacific and fight the Japanese. And I was like, and you're complaining that you don't have Netflix.
I've every once in a while I get caught in that where I complain about something I shouldn't, and I don't complain out loud normally to people at all, because complaining is like the last thing I want to hear from anybody. But every once in a while I catch myself I didn't have my phone for last week for a piece of it, and I couldn't do so. Well, I had a phone, but I couldn't receive things on sometimes. Well, anywho, some of my apps weren't loading, and I was freaking out. It was like I was like it's almost like I cut myself off from caffeine for like a week after, drinking 1,000 milligrams, like 35 cups of coffee a day, and then just stopping cold. I was just like shaking, like, why won't this load?
Right.
That's a really real thing.
Yeah, and it just kind of puts it in perspective. Where,
it does.
Like this nation is such a beautiful thing, founded on a lot of that flag is still flying because there was a lot of blood in the grass. I always try to think about that when I'm having a bad day or when I don't feel motivated.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, you know what? A lot of people have sacrificed their lives to give me the chance to do what I'm doing right now. So I'm going to, I guess I'll get out of
just
bed
gonna suck it up and
drive the truck that I have to boxing because I can afford a truck and I can afford gas and I'm living a pretty solid life. So why am I even having this thought cross my mind right now? I'm not 17 miles behind enemy lines in a trench with no food. Yeah. So I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah, but it's just, sometimes it's hard when you're in the thick of things. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
So it's, even the best, the Tony Robbins of the world, the people who are some of the most positive people who wake up in the morning and the first thing a lot of CEOs, a lot of the top producers in their areas in any field in the country, they wake up, and this ties right in with your point. They practice gratitude, right?
Agreed.
Right, and they think of 3 things they're grateful for, and then they step into that moment. They visualize it. They close their eyes, and it could be a moment that they're re-experiencing, because it's really important to put yourself in a position where I don't want to say. A lot of people say. They love to say, well, it could be worse. And I hate that. You're right, it could be worse, but reframe it. Look at it different. Like you said, you framed it in a way where you remembered the people who literally laid down their lives for you to have this opportunity to do what you do, instead of it could be worse. Of course, it could be worse, but be grateful for the position you're in, because their challenge was a lot. It was. Their life was on the line.
Yeah, and other than that, what I always try to tell people too, that the flip side of that is whether. So this is gonna be really extreme, right? But say you have somebody that, they lost their job. Okay, that's just one example. Yeah. And then on the other side, they just found out that 2 members of their family died in a car crash. Okay, but on this side, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to them. Okay. And on this side, they loved that job so much that this is the worst thing that's ever happened to them. Yeah. So to each of those people, the emotion that they're feeling is, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. So you can't compare apples to apples. Yes. And you can't say
it's all relative.
Could be worse, because it's all relative to that person's interpretation of what the world is.
Oh, man.
So okay, all of that aside, that's going to be a rabbit hole that's impossible to get out of.
I agree. Chapter 6.
Yeah.
Back to the book.
Yeah, we'll move on to chapter 6. So getting to zero gravity. Okay. This is actually, I think that this is pretty sweet. So he talks about NASA, and this is in the book. He says NASA has a plane that it uses to help astronauts acclimate to zero gravity. Everyone calls it the Vomit Comet, even though NASA refers to it as the Weightless Wonder, a public relations gesture aimed at distracting attention from the obvious. So this entire chapter, I want to put you in the frame of mind that listen to this chapter and think about not approaching something from the front. You have to flank something. You know what I mean? You don't always attack, like the Spartans when they formed their formations. Mm-hmm. If you tried to attack them from the front, they were impenetrable. The only way that you'd be able to get to any of them would be to come in from behind or from the side. And that's how they fought the Persians, was they would come in to the side. And so he says he started a study with Carnegie Mellon students, project proposing using virtual reality, and basically created this study, right? They got it, they submitted it to NASA, NASA accepted it, and they invited the students out to get onto the plane. And Randy was all excited because he's like, I'm going to be able to get on the Weightless Wonder. Then he got a rejection letter from NASA saying that under no circumstances could faculty advisors fly with their students. And so to the book, he says, I was heartbroken, but I was not deterred. I would find a way around this brick wall. I decided to carefully read all of the literature about the program, looking for loopholes, and I found one. NASA, always eager for good publicity, would allow a journalist from the student's hometown to come along for the ride. I called an official at NASA and asked his fax number. He said, what are you going to fax us? He said, I'm going to resign as the faculty advisor and fax you my application as the journalist. And he said, I'll be accompanying my students in the new role as the member of the media. And the guy he's talking to says, that's a little transparent, don't you think? He said, sure, but I also promised him that when I'd get the information, I would get it onto news websites, send our film to virtual reality efforts, to mainstream media journalism. And I knew that I could pull that off. And it was a win-win for everybody. So he gave me his fax number. So the lesson here is have something to bring to the table because it makes you way more welcome. So what I'm going to relate this to, and this is a really short chapter, so what I'm going to relate this to is just a quick concept that I want to kind of impart from the military to the civilian side. And this can be applied in business world. It can be applied in a training regimen. It can be applied in a relationship, pretty much anywhere. Where have a solution prepared in your mind, at least a potential solution, when you come to complain to somebody about a problem. When I had a colonel put this really, really well to me one time. She said, I'll have people come into my office. And they complain and they complain and they complain and they complain and they complain. And then I look at them and I go, and ... She's like, I use that one word. And I say, and they look at me and they're like, and she's like, so what are you going to do about it? And then if they have a response, then I take them seriously. And if not, then I say, well, until you have a possible way for me to help you with this, there's nothing I can do. So if you bring something to the table, if you have your girlfriend and she's like going off about something, right? And you're just like, oh, I don't know what's going on. Or you do something and you're trying to figure out how you're going to approach her about it. Don't just go up and say, well, I can't believe that you did this, and this. That's not going to go over good.
No, it never does. I've tried that, actually.
Yeah, and it doesn't go good either way. And with friendships even. Yeah. You know what I mean? It doesn't go over good if you just come up and start attacking that person. But if you're like, hey, so this is something that like is going on. Part of it's my fault. You know what I mean? This is something that I think that would possibly help like fix this feeling. That's probably, I'm not trying to give any guarantees by any means, you know what I mean? But that's way better than just going,
sure.
You're wrong.
Yeah. There's always a better way to approach something, for sure.
So just think about what angle you're approaching it from.
I liked how specific that dream was, just in ending that chapter 6. I think it's really important to have specific dreams, because he could easily, they told him no. that he couldn't go with him.
Yeah.
Right? But he found a way to do it because he had a specific dream. Did he not? That's what he wanted to do that. And so he found a way to do it. So he opened a door for himself.
Agreed.
He closed the door to open the door to meet his specific
goal
or dream. So
cool.
I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah. All right. So chapter 7, I never made it to the NFL.
Well, I love football, so I loved this chapter. I loved the whole book, but this chapter is one of my favorites just because he talks about football, and this is something that the lesson from this chapter is pretty cool. So he starts playing football when I believe he's 9. I believe that's when he starts playing football. And he was at practice one day, and I'm just going to read this. So this is the first day of practice. He said, on the first day of practice, we were all scared to death.
Dun, dun, dun.
And the coach hadn't brought in any footballs. And one kid finally spoke up for all of us. Excuse me, coach, there are no footballs. And Coach Graham responded, we don't need any footballs. And there was silence while we thought about that. How many men are on the football field at a time, he asked us. 11 on a team, we answered. So that makes 22. And how many people are touching the football at any given time? One of them. Right, he said. So we're going to work on what those other 21 guys are doing. I thought that was incredible because...
Yep. Fundamentals.
Yeah, it is the fundamentals, and there's always something else you can do. In football terms, I mean, you're a football fan. You don't necessarily have to, like, if you think about a lineman, they make it possible for the quarterback and the running back and all those people to get recognition, right? It takes the entire team. It takes the entire unit to accomplish the goal. The quarterback doesn't block. He doesn't snap the ball. He doesn't do anything. And so my big takeaway was it takes the whole unit. And I think in your background, you know that it takes the whole unit. I mean, there's a lot of things you can pull out of all these chapters, but for me, that's what I think of is that, even if you aren't recognized, it doesn't mean that what you're doing, that you're not having an impact.
Right. And even if you're being, not just if you're not being recognized, but even if you feel like you're being recognized in a negative way, right? He talks about that. And this is in the book. He says, when you're screwing up and nobody says anything to you anymore, that means they've given up on you. That lesson has stuck with me my whole life. When you see yourself doing something badly and nobody's bothering to tell you anymore, that's a bad place to be. And that quote kind of was prefaced by the fact that Coach Graham, his coach at that point, was riding him really hard all practice. And the assistant coach basically said, hey, Coach Graham rode you pretty hard, right? He's like, yeah. And he's like, well, that's a good thing. He was like, that means he cares. And that's big. I mean, just I think in general, if you're to the point now where nobody's even bothering to call you out on things, are you making yourself so intimidating that nobody's willing to critique you?
Yeah, approachable.
Is your ego so big that nobody's even willing to try to pop your head so that you can fit back through the door?
Yeah.
Or are you so blind to people trying to critique you that you're unable to even adapt? It's opening your mind, right, to the fact that you're proud of how far you've come, but also having a deep understanding of how short you fall.
Absolutely.
And being able to take those critiques. So chapter 8 is You'll Find Me Under V. So this chapter is all about how he had a dream about authoring a chapter in the World Book. I didn't have a whole lot written down in this chapter, so one quick thing that I basically wanted to hit was that when he grew up, it was something I really vibed with because I loved reading encyclopedias when I was a little kid, which is super nerdy. But my head is just full of useless facts at this point, right? And they're not useless because they all just kind of...
They can apply in all
like
kinds of
the other day I was talking to my friend, and she was on her way home from a wedding, and she was like, oh, the moon looks really cool. And I was like, oh, yeah, it does look really cool. I was like, do you see that little orange dot next to the moon? She was like, yeah. And I was like, that's Mars. She was like, how do you know that? And I was like, my dad bought me a telescope when I was a little kid, and I liked reading encyclopedias. And so I figured out that was Mars.
Well, at least...
Like, that's weird. Why do you know that? And I was like, well, I was like, you thought it was cool, right?
Are you impressed?
So, yeah.
I hope you're impressed now.
Right. But that's really, I mean, what I pulled from this chapter is just never underestimate the power of random facts. And he appreciated so much being able to add to that body of knowledge that it's just, first, don't ever underestimate and underappreciate learning, and then always feel honored to be able to contribute to something that other people might be able to learn from. And that's kind of what we're doing here, right?
Absolutely.
We're not writing in an encyclopedia, but we're authoring our own little ideas, and they're going to be forever recorded.
For sure.
For people to be able to listen to. So
you'd have to get somebody else in here if you wanted to write an encyclopedia.
Yeah, no, I'm not
that wouldn't work with me.
I'm not the authority figure on pretty much on that kind of stuff. So I'm actually going to steal this chapter from you.
Steal it. Take it.
So this
Yours.
one's called a skill set called leadership.
Oh, not that one. No, go ahead.
So 2 reasons why I wanted to steal this. 1, I love Captain Kirk and the Enterprise. And 2, leadership. That's my thing. I love that stuff. So here we go, to the book. Think about it. If you've seen the TV show, you know that Kirk was not the smartest guy on the ship. Mr. Spock, his first officer, was always logical and intellectual. Dr. McCoy had all the medical knowledge available to mankind. Scotty was the chief engineer who had the technical know-how to keep that ship running even when it was under attack by aliens. So what was Kirk's skill set? Why did he get to climb on board the Enterprise and sit in the captain's chair? Right? The answer is there's a skill set called leadership. He was the distilled essence of the dynamic manager, a guy who knew how to delegate, had the passion to inspire, and looked good in what he wore to work. He never professed to have skills greater than his subordinates. He acknowledged that they knew what they were doing in their domains, but he established the vision, the tone. He was in charge of morale. You know, the next line says, on top of that, Kirk had the romantic chops to woo women in every galaxy, but I'm just going to...
Which helped.
Yeah, whatever. But that has nothing to do with the leadership stuff. So I'm going to focus on the stuff that leads up to that. I really... Actually, you know what? I'm going to add on one more thing. So William Shatner, in person, says to him, the ultimate example of a man is how to know that you're perfectly willing to admit that you don't understand everything. And Randy's impression of Shatner was that he was the ultimate example of a man who knew that what he didn't know and was perfectly willing to admit it and didn't want to leave until he understood it. Right? So to couple that with Kirk and how he wasn't the smartest person on the ship, he understood how intense all of his crew members were and how good they were at their individual jobs and stuff like that. I graduated college with like a 3.4, I think. Something like that, right? So by no means was I always a straight A student. You know what I mean? Contrary to popular belief, apparently.
I thought you were just straight A's.
Yeah.
Truth comes out.
No, was not. So... but I focus on a lot of different things. You know what I mean? I had that 3.4 GPA, but I wanted to try to tutor people as often as possible. I did a choir. I did the military thing on top of that. I was working full time. And I'm not using those as any excuses because I definitely could have probably gotten better grades if I spent more time studying. And I did party and I did do all that other kind of stuff. You know, college is college. But it's not the GPA all the time that makes the good leader. It's not the academic knowledge. No. It's not the intellectual knowledge. It's not how many books you read. It's a skill set that can be learned, but also has to be part natural ability.
For sure.
And it's just, you can take, it's like if you have somebody that has the genetics to be an Olympic level runner, right?
Okay.
Yes, I can run, and I can probably train as hard as I want to every day for the next 20 years and still not be able to run as fast as Usain Bolt.
Absolutely.
Right? He just has genetics.
He does.
So, and I think that's that same thing with leadership.
Yeah.
You can train yourself, you can train your mentality, take public speaking classes, take a speech class, learn how to master the English language, learn how to talk to people, learn the psychology behind personalities, yada, 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 yada. And still not be as fast as Usain Bolt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And that's something that I think is really, really set in this skill set called leadership. That's just, you can develop it as much as you want, but you can lead from pretty much everywhere. People, I think, too many times try to be that front runner leader, where they're like, I need to be the one that's in the front of the pack. Like, charge, let's do this. You don't always have to lead from there. You can lead from the middle of the pack.
Yeah.
You can lead from the back of the pack. You can lead from pretty much anywhere.
You can.
And that's, topics that are addressed in other podcasts, but that's something that I think he's alluding to, right, in this chapter, that it's not always a skill set that we might associate with leadership that makes the best leader.
Yeah, it's all about just knowing who you're leading, because you need to know who you're leading to understand where you need to lead from.
Oh, yeah, agreed. All right, do you have any notes for chapter 10 here, like where he's talking about
Winning big?
Yeah.
The stuffed animal?
Yeah, the stuffed animals.
Oh, my gosh.
Okay, cool, because I didn't actually highlight anything, so this is...
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to... I will click my pen.
Cool, man.
And write some stuff down.
So chapter 10 is Winning Big. I love this chapter because I went to carnivals when I was younger, and he talks about one of his childhood dreams was to be the coolest guy at the carnival. And what does the coolest guy entail at a carnival? He's the guy that you see walking around the carnival with the enormous stuffed animal, right? And he's a really of a competitive guy, and his family grew up going to carnivals and stuff, and they would always try to win the big stuffed animal. That's how his dad was as well.
Right.
And he has two secrets to winning giant stuffed animals: long arms and a small amount of discretionary income. I have been blessed in life to have both, because obviously all of us know
Stuff's rigged.
It is rigged. How do you think they make money? Like, the carnivals are like a casino almost. Like, the games are so hard on purpose. They want you to fail.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they want you to fail. And so
I've never heard that. The carnivals are like a casino. That's awesome. That's a good...
They are, though,
That's
right?
a good comparison. Yeah. No, I've never won a stuffed animal, and it's probably why I didn't read this chapter very very happily.
Well, I'm glad I can fill you in on it. I will tell you that I've never won a giant stuffed animal, but it's because I'm a very competitive person, but so I didn't have a small amount of discretionary income that I wanted to throw towards that. I was more of a video game guy growing up, so that's why you were... Yeah, what? Oh, I was a nerd too. You know, nerd is this term that we throw around that it's really whatever you're passionate about at that time. If you do it a lot, you're a nerd. So they're sports nerds. You know what I mean? They're all over the place. But my huge takeaway from this is, if you guys have an opportunity to watch the last lecture and on YouTube, and man, do we really want you to watch that, because it is incredible. Like, what we're doing right now is incredible, but after you listen to this, if you watch it, I think you're going to be able to pick up things that you wouldn't have been able to pick up watching it had you not listened to our book review first.
Right. Agreed.
But he shows up at the last lecture with the teddy bear he won at the carnival.
Yep.
Everything he does throughout this whole book, a lot of people say, they say they'll tell you they want a bear or whatever. They'll tell you they want to inspire you, but they don't give you examples, or they don't show you. I mean, he shows you that he won it. It makes him a lot more credible, but...
he brings multiple. He straight up lines them up on the stage and says, "Hey, if anybody wants any of these, if you want to remember this lecture, come up here and take them." And a bunch of people came up and grabbed giant teddy bears. Yeah, and I just thought it was super cool, because he talks about how he didn't feel like putting your resume up there.
No, that's really what he did. It's really what he did. I think a lot of people. So I'm going to hit this super quick because I think it's something that drives me crazy. A lot of people, they talk about millennials and how millennials are entitled to everything. I think throughout the entire continuum of life, people have felt entitled. It's not millennials. And if it is, maybe there should have been a better foundation laid for people to not think like this, because it started with his parents and one of the first chapters, right?
Right.
He hit the parent lottery, right? But feeling entitled, you talked about he lines up his resume. He could line up his resume at a lot of places and he could feel entitled that he deserves a job or whatever. But he goes out and he earns it. Yeah. He earns it.
Agreed.
He feels entitled to it, but that doesn't mean that he still goes out and earns it. He believes he should have it. So that's all I'll say about that, because I could talk about entitlement and all that for days, weeks, months.
Yeah, sounds like it could be a good another episode.
Yeah.
Okay, so chapter 11, the happiest place on earth. So this is where he kind of talks about his dream of becoming a Disney Imagineer. And I'll preface it to the book. In 1969, when I was 8 years old, my family went on a cross-country trip to see Disneyland. It was a quest. And once we got there, I was just in awe of the place. It was the coolest environment I'd ever been in. So, 8 years old. Okay, and his thought process was not, this is awesome. It was, I want to make stuff like this at 8.
At 8.
So, he wanted to be Imagineer for a long, long time. And he ends up getting there, but he has to cross over a bunch of barriers. So he gets his PhD, right? Submits a resume, and he's like, cool, I'm a shoo-in. Got my PhD. And he says, I basically got the nicest go-to-hell letters ever from Disney that said, unfortunately, we currently do not have any openings that would fit your particular skill set.
That's awesome.
And in the lecture, he's like, don't they have people that sweep floors? He was like, I'd be cool to do that, to at least start out and be working there. I just thought that was funny.
It's hilarious.
So that initial rejection, doesn't dissuade him. He's like, okay, well, I'm going to try to find another way. He talks about brick walls all the time in this book.
Yeah.
And it's just, okay, what are you going to do? Are you going to just stare at the brick wall? Are you going to try to climb over it? You're going to go under it? You can bust through it and go around it? You got to find a way past the brick wall.
Absolutely.
And this is a quote that, he says a whole bunch of different times in the book. And the quote is, the brick walls aren't there to keep something in. It's there to keep people that don't really want to be there out. He's like, you're used to discern how bad you really want it. And whether he compares that to his wife, how bad he wanted to be with his wife and how many brick walls were in the way of that. Or the Imagineering, NASA. How much do you want to get to what's on the other side of that brick wall?
Yeah.
And you guys hit a lot of walls right in running.
All the time.
You hit a wall and you're like, okay, well, how bad do you want to finish?
Yeah.
How bad do you want to pick up the tempo?
That's literally, yeah, it couldn't be, yeah.
So without the risk of running down that rabbit hole, we would. Yeah, we'll go back to the book. And he says, before I went to go see a gentleman by the name of John Snoddy. He says, I did 80 hours of homework. I asked all of the virtual reality hotshots I knew to share their thoughts and questions about this Disney project. I finally met John and was wowed, and he was wowed by how prepared I was. And this is something that is super, applicable to me. It's easy to look smart when you're parroting smart people. Okay. And that's what we're doing by reading this book. And that's what you do when you read books, period, or you listen to lectures, or you take classes. You're learning to parrot information that's been around for thousands of years. You know what I mean? When I read Musashi or The Art of War or About Face by Colonel David Hackworth, or some of these books, About Face is way newer, obviously, than Musashi and The Art of War. But most of the things that people apply to daily lives, they still give people the art of war in military war colleges now.
Yeah.
and say, hey, these lessons from 2,000 years ago, put AR-15s in their hands instead of, not AR-15s, but put rifles in their hand instead of samurai swords. Same principles apply.
Yep.
It's crazy. So you're not actually getting new ideas, you're reframing them and parroting smart people. So if you surround yourself with that body of knowledge consistently day in and day out, not only do you make yourself sound like an intellectual person, you start becoming that intellectual person. And that's my number one. Like, if you want to start looking at life through a different lens, start reading, start listening to lectures, start listening to audiobooks, go out and listen to Tony Robbins, listen to Eric Thomas, listen to Les Brown, listen to these people that have these perspectives on things, and it'll slowly start to change your mindset.
Yep.
Okay.
I had to look up this quote real quick because I want to end this chapter with this. The Jim Rohn quote that he talks about. The quality of your life is basically the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So find people who are smarter than you. Find people who can offer different perspectives and such.
Oh, yeah.
Like
if you
that.
want to be a lion, you got to surround yourself with lions.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. Because it's really easy to look like a lion if you're surrounded by kittens. But if you're around a bunch of other lions, it kind of forces you to step your game up.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're moving into another section of the book now, and this one's called Adventures and Lessons Learned. And the first chapter in this is called The Park is Open Till 8 p.m. And he starts off the chapter by talking about how his medical issues started happening and how they did the CT scans and really started to find things, and how he was willing to do pretty much anything to survive. I mean, he was at that point where he was not in denial that he had the disease, but being a researcher, being a professor, being so involved in academia, he was willing to explore any option possible to survive. And this is a really kind of intense moment that I want to kind of try and, I mean, I'm going to try to capture it, but this is something that I think that you should definitely watch the lecture after listening to this to kind of get the full gravity of it. It's over, I said to Jay. My goose is cooked. What do you mean? She asked. I told her that CA 1919 or 19-9 value, which is a basically an identifier for cancerous cells in the body. And back to the book. She had educated herself enough about the cancer treatments to know that 208 indicated metastasis, a death sentence. It's not funny, she said. Stop joking around. Then I pulled up my CT scans on the computer and started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I could hear the panic in Jay's voice. Don't tell me you're counting tumors. I couldn't help myself. I kept counting aloud. 7, 8, 9, 10. I saw it all. The cancer had metastasized to my liver. And the lesson that I think that is in this chapter is he kind of happens a couple of pages later when the doctor comes in and realizes that he has looked at the CT scan and realizes that he is metastasized and that Jay understands. And so back to the book. He says, I wish every medical student considering oncology could see what I was seeing. I was watching Dr. Wolf use semantics to phrase whatever he could in a positive light. When we asked, how long before I die? He answered, you probably have 3 to 6 months of good health. It reminded me of my time at Disney. If you ask Disney World workers, what time does the park close? They're supposed to answer, the park is open until 8 p.m. At the end of the meeting, the doctor hugged Jay and shook my hand, and Jay and I walked out together into our new reality. We walked into that office and we had talked the day prior and said, even if the scan results are bad tomorrow, I just want you to know that it feels great to be alive and to be here today, alive with you. Whatever news we get about the scans, I'm not going to die when we hear it. I won't die the next day or the day after that or the day after that. So today, right now, this is a wonderful day. And I want you to know how much I'm enjoying it. I thought about that and about Jay's smile. I knew then that's the way the rest of my life would need to be lived. Just going to go ahead and end that chapter on that. We'll move on to chapter 13. So,
back to the book, The Man in the Convertible. I loved this chapter.
It's 2 pages.
Yeah, I love it.
Super impactful, but
it is. And this, for me, had a lot to do with attitude. So one of his colleagues is in their car, Robbie, Kozak, in driving down the road, and they see this convertible. And they look over and they see this guy in his car and he's smiling. And it reminded Robbie that in that particular moment, all they were worrying about was what they were doing. There was a man in a convertible. He's out on a ride, and he's just enjoying that moment in his life. He's enjoying the present, right?
Right.
He's not worrying about the future. He's not looking at the past. He's just enjoying the moment. He's staying in the moment. Mm-hmm. And the convertible turns the corner, and Robbie understands and figures out that the man in the convertible is actually Randy.
Yeah.
And that Randy has been diagnosed with cancer for a while now.
Yeah.
Right? And so for most people, you'd probably go through the rest of for a lot of people, go through the rest of your life frowning, thinking this is it, and living every day that. But nobody's watching Randy. Randy doesn't know that someone else is looking at him. Mm-hmm. And it's when no one's watching, his attitude's good. You know what I mean? And I think that's a really a big thing to pick up on. That is, he chose to have a good attitude even when no one was watching, because that's the only option he had. The only thing he can control is his attitude. He can't control how fast the cancer is going to progress, but he can control his attitude. And what I picked up on this is, no matter the obstacles that stand in your way, no matter the challenge that you're going through, have a good attitude even when no one's watching. Because what you do what you do behind closed doors, usually you do that in the open as well. And so, if you can have a good attitude when no one's around, when, you're in some of your darkest moments, it makes it really easier to have a good attitude when you're around a lot of the people you love. And I thought it was just a beautiful thing of she's watching him continue to celebrate. He's watching him celebrate life even in his darkest moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't really add anything to that. That I think pretty much sums up exactly what I was thinking when I read that.
Okay.
So chapter 14 is The Dutch Uncle. So he starts off this chapter to the book. Anyone who knows me will tell you that I've always had a healthy sense of myself and my abilities. I tend to say what I'm thinking and what I believe. I don't have much patience for incompetence. And then he goes on to an example. And he says that one time when I was 7 years old, Tammy, his sister, was 9. We were waiting for the school bus, and as usual, I was mouthing off. She decided that she had had enough. She picked up my metal lunchbox and dropped it in a mud puddle, just as the bus had pulled up. My sister ended up in the principal's office while I was sent to the janitor, who cleaned up my lunchbox, threw out my mud-soaked sandwich, and kindly gave me some lunch money. The principal told Tammy that he had called our mother. I'm going to let her handle this, he said. When we arrived home after school, Mom said, I'm going to let your father handle this. My sister spent the day nervously awaiting her fate. When my father got home after work, he wasn't going to punish Tammy. He did everything but congratulate her. I was a kid who needed to have his lunchbox dropped in a puddle. Tammy was relieved, and I'd been put in my place, though the lesson didn't completely sink in. So to apply this to my life in boxing, okay, my boxing trainer says all the time, especially for males, right? About every 6 months, you need your butt handed to you on a silver platter. Because it's like, you start to get a little bit too confident, a little hot-headed. You're like, oh, I'm the crap. You know what I mean? I dodged that punch. I got this. I got that. And if he feels like you're doing that, he's like, all right, cool. Throw on gloves. Let's spar. It's like, crap. You're about to get rocked.
Yeah.
And it's why I love sparring so much, or I love jiu-jitsu. I love boxing because it's an equalizer. And if you're that kid that mouths off all the time, or you have a loud mouth, you're very confident in your abilities, blah, 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 blah. But if you get your butt handed to you every 6 months, you kind of get rocked back down to ground zero and have to start building back up. But that ground zero is an echelon above where your ground zero was initially. So it's like climb, drop down, but it's 2 points higher than your original zero.
Just like working out.
Yeah, and you keep climbing, keep dropping, keep climbing, keep dropping. And it's just like he said. I mean, really, to sum up that chapter, sometimes you need to understand that you're the kid that needs to have his lunchbox dropped in a puddle. And sometimes if somebody doesn't do that to you, life will do it for you. And
that's an entire podcast episode.
You just got to rock with it. Sometimes your sandwich just gets soaked in mud. And
it's to your benefit that it does.
Yep, it's to your benefit.
Oh, my gosh.
And you just accept the fact that that's what it is. And so I'll end this with the final lines from the chapter. And he says, I've been lucky enough to have benefited over the years from people like Andy, who have cared enough to tell me the tough love things that I needed to hear. And that's it. Just be willing to hear those critiques from people, because most of the time if they're critiquing you, they love you.
Yeah.
Or they at least want to see you do better.
Yeah, absolutely.
So.
Well put.
All right, pouring soda in the back seat.
I didn't have a whole lot of notes for 15, to be honest with you.
Rock on. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I got some things highlighted, so.
I was actually really excited about this chapter.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Because you didn't have things highlighted, or?
Because for me, I didn't take as much out of it as I did the other chapters. I mean, I could have talked about all the other chapters for
days.
Yeah. I really could have.
Okay. Well, I'll take it then. So this chapter, he says, for a long time, a big part of my identity was being the bachelor uncle. In my 20s and 30s, I had no kids, and my sisters had 2 children, Chris and Laura. He loved being Uncle Randy, the guy that showed up in their lives every month or so to help them look at their world from strange new angles. So some of the things that I had highlighted in this chapter is this situation right here. I mean, it's after the title of the chapter. He said he had just gotten a brand new Volkswagen Convertible. And his sister says, be careful in Uncle Randy's new car. Wipe your feet before you get in. Don't mess anything up. Don't get it dirty. I listened to her and thought, as a bachelor uncle, that's just the sort of admonition that sets kids up for failure. Of course they'll eventually get my car dirty. Kids can't help it. So I made things easy. While my sister was outlining the rules, I slowly and deliberately opened a can of soda, turned it over, and poured it on the cloth seats in the back of my convertible. My message, people are more important than things. A car, even a pristine gem like my brand new convertible, was replaceable. It was just a thing. And he kind of ends this with something that I think is super funny. He says, when the kids were with me, we had just 2 rules. No whining, and whatever we do together, don't tell mom.
A lot of dads are like that, I feel like.
Yeah, and like uncles. I mean, I feel like part of your job as an uncle is just to...
I do that a little.
Take them
it's
out.
actually my niece's birthday today, just saying.
Nice. Well, happy birthday to your niece.
Yeah.
So that section right there is, I can't distill it down anything better than just things aren't as important as people.
They're not.
You know what I mean? Like, I remember very specifically, and why this chapter kind of rang home with me. When I was first learning how to drive, I was backing my dad's van out of the garage, and I nailed my aunt's car. I mean, like, smacked the crap out of it.
It's a bad day.
Yeah, it was bad because I didn't check my mirrors. You know, as a new driver,
Yeah.
I checked my mirrors, but I didn't look in the blind spot. You know what I mean? I didn't really even understand what blind spots were. Yeah, so I smacked the crap out of her car, and her response was, it's okay. Like, it still runs. We'll get a door. And that, to me, has stuck in my mind throughout the entire time because my dad was freaking out. You know what I mean? And my aunt was just kind of like, yeah, it's all good. Like, you didn't mean to do it. It's just a car. Like, it's replaceable. We'll figure it out. And subconsciously, now, like, when people mess something of mine up, I'm like, it's just a thing. You know what I mean? For the longest time, I didn't even lock the door to my apartment because I was just like, you know what? If someone really needs something that bad that they come in here and steal it, take it.
Plus, you're a Ninja Warrior, so it doesn't really matter. I welcome you into my apartment.
Yeah. That concealed carry comes in handy. Not that I've ever had anybody try to rob me, but that's just the mentality behind it is just, you know, things are things. They're replaceable. Yeah. The relationships that you form with people are what are truly important.
And situations. I feel like some people, sometimes my mom, I remember I was like 22 years old and I messed up big time. It was one of the more, the moments in my life where I was very discouraged, just because of something I did. And it had nothing to do with a specific thing, but I definitely could have jeopardized the way people looked at her by what I did. And I've never done anything like that, but I was a young kid doing dumb stuff, and I remember how she handled me after that. And I was 20 years old. Was I 19 years old? So I don't know. This was 9 years ago, and I'm in tears. And my mom is a very,
nerves of titanium.
Yeah. You know, she's. If anybody, some of my friends call her Yes Man because if you hear me speak to my mom, if you hear me say Yes Man period on the phone, I'm talking to my mom, but you'll hear me say it 30 times. Like she demands respect, and that's why I'm so respectful to other people. Mm-hmm. I grew up in like a military household with her. Right? Basically, is what it was.
Police officers, firefighters, first responders. Like we're all the same.
Well, even before she did, like we have a very southern approach to manners and stuff, but. I remember in this moment, I remember throughout my whole life, I've done things that have been so much smaller, and I've made so much, like a lot of mistakes that were a lot smaller than this particular mistake. And I remember how she handled it because of how, of the position that she saw me in, and how it hurt me. So I think I think that's really cool. It's not. I don't think it's just things. I think it's situations as well. Because life does go on.
Agreed. So. Yes, it does. 100% of people that live die.
They do, actually. I saw that statistic the other day.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
All right. And romancing the brick wall.
This is probably your favorite chapter yet.
This is one of them.
I know. I know that's why, because when I said about 15, it's like wasn't I didn't pick as much up from that one. You were like, but I wanted 16. So go ahead. You can rock out. Go ahead and start off 16, because I know that you want to probably lead with one of the best quotes of the book.
Yeah.
You might not want to lead with it, but it's an awesome
right.
chapter.
So, you already kind of spoiled it. So I'll start at the very end of the chapter.
I did.
Right,
okay.
the very last line of the chapter is what I think is the best quote of the chapter. And he says, brick walls are there for a reason. They give us a chance to show how badly we want something, right? So I just alluded to that in one of the earlier things. And some of my notes that I have on that is just, it's true for athletes, relationships, business ventures, school, career. Bust through that wall. Sometimes patience and a little support goes a long way with people. You can get people, and you know this as a coach, like you can get people from one level to the next level with a little bit of patience, support, and mentorship.
Mm-hmm. Easy.
If you can get somebody to the next level, but this is something I'll end my little take on this chapter and give you kind of the reins, where I was just, the one thing that I found funny in it was that I can vibe with is, I was a fun-loving workaholic, Peter Pan with metal folding chairs in my dining room. No woman, even the right kind, would expect to settle down blissfully into anything like that. My apartment right now is literally like a couch that doesn't match with a leather chair, like a random coffee table. There's an air mattress in my living room because I'm letting my buddy stay there. There's one picture on the wall, I think. The rest is just white, and then like a TV with random things on the TV stand. Like it's totally a bachelor pad. And I was just like, yep, no, I can kind of vibe with the whole metal chairs in the living room kind of deal, where it's just, maybe it's time to make a transition. Like, should probably start cleaning some of that stuff up.
I got you.
Maybe being a little bit more organized. But
you're getting stuff done right now.
Yeah, that's true.
It's grind season. Yeah, I mean, I like this chapter just because he talks about, and this is, I think, one of the first challenges we always have in life early on is when we start liking girls, you know, whenever that is. I don't know, 5, 10, I
was homeschooled, so it didn't happen until I was like 13, and I realized what a girl was. No, I'm kidding.
But like, oh my gosh, there's people with long hair.
I've never seen one of those before.
Oh, they smell different.
Oh my gosh. Okay, that was, we're kind of starting to get a little creepy.
So he talks about, his later on, his wife, Jay, who eventually he marries. He talks about meeting her and asking his dad for advice. And that quote, I kind of want to go back to that quote, and I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I'll go over it briefly. He says, brick walls are there for a reason. They give us a chance to show how badly we want something, or if, I think in some circumstances, it's just not how badly we want it, if we're deserving of it as well, in certain.
Okay.
Because I think, brick walls are also there to show us if we have that particular skill set to do what we're going after. Because a lot of people aren't necessarily, they're not in a field that would show or display their skill set to its entirety.
Okay. That's fair, yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't change the quote, but I think sometimes I think it could be deserve as well, but I think this applies more so to everything.
Yeah, especially in the context of the whole he's talking about trying to court his wife early on, basically. And I think that's a way better way to think about it for this chapter.
Oh, no, for sure.
Proving that you deserve her.
No.
Yeah.
I know, and that's why I saw that look, the original look you gave me, and I was like, hold on, let me
finish.
Let me tell you what I mean.
Yeah.
It's definitely, that's why I wouldn't change the quote. But we talked about it early on about like accomplishing things. That's why I said sometimes to accomplish something you have to deserve it.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But absolutely for this chapter, and a lot of people they'll go, they'll go at something one time, and then it doesn't work out well, and then they stop. Mm-hmm. But he just consistently, he obviously he wanted a relationship, and so
he kept going.
He kept going, kept having conversations, kept putting himself out there, and obviously he wanted Jay to be his wife.
Yeah, and he wanted to support her. I think that was the biggest thing. He was willing to check his own needs and just support what she wanted to do.
And she saw that.
Yep, and she saw it, yeah.
And that just put them on a completely different level.
Yep. Nope, agreed. All right. So chapter 17, not all fairy tales end smoothly. This is crazy, this chapter. So after him and Jay get married, right, he wanted to have like this fairy tale exit to the wedding, and they get in a hot air balloon, which I think is sweet.
That's pretty dope.
You know what I mean? That's really cool.
That's pretty dope.
Future wifey out there, pay attention, baby. We'll hop in a balloon and fly away. Or maybe you won't want to after you figure out how this chapter ends. So he says, so to the book, the balloon traveled over urban Pittsburgh, back and forth above the city's famous Three Rivers. This was not where the ballooneer wanted to be, and I could see that he was worried. There's no place to put this bird down, he said, almost to himself. Then to us, we've got to keep looking. And so he found a field, and they go to put the balloon down. And so back to the book, a train was coming. At that moment, I was no longer a groom. I was an engineer. I said to the ballooneer, "Sir, I think I see a variable here." A variable? Is that what you computer guys call a problem? I don't know why I pictured like a crazy Southern Ohio, West Virginia accent with that. But like, I'm picturing this guy going, a variable? Is that what y'all call a problem?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know, that's probably just because that's how I grew up. But so back to the book, he said, well, yes, what if we hit the train? He answered honestly and said if we were in the basket of the balloon and the odds of the basket hitting the train were small. But if the giant balloon itself fell onto the tracks and the speeding train got tangled in it, we'd be at the wrong end of a rope inside of a basket getting dragged very fast. So they ended up landing, and I mean, everything went as well as it could possibly go, I guess. I mean, they crash landed the balloon, they jumped out. It didn't get caught by the tracks or anything like that. And back to the book, we spent some time decompressing from our reminder that even fairy tale moments have risks, while the collapsed balloon was loaded onto the balloonier's truck. Then, just as Jack was about to take us home, the balloonier came trotting over to us and said, wait, you ordered the wedding package. It comes with a bottle of champagne. He handed us a cheap bottle from his truck and said, congratulations. We smiled weakly and thanked him. This final line, I think, is big. Okay. It was only dusk on our first day of marriage, but we'd made it so far.
That's
so
big first
balloon,
day.
Balloon hits the ground. All that craziness happens. Like am I gonna die? Like, am I gonna get hooked on this train?
Yeah.
We haven't even gotten to go on our honeymoon yet. This is some bull crap.
Man, that would be it. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, I got 8 days in Aruba and I'm going to die on a train. But that line, I think, just in whether it's, friendships, relationships, whatever, it was only dusk on our first day of marriage, but we'd made it so far. And that's like a mentality that you should have day in and day out, right? People get caught up in a bunch of BS in relationships a lot of time, in friendships a lot of time. People hold grudges. Like, if you can just look at it as like, hey, we made it through today. That was rough, but we made it. Like, okay.
Yeah.
Let's keep rocking. And that's harder to do when it's a conflict, you know what I mean, instead of like a near-death experience. Because
Oh, for sure.
But if you start to look at it through a different lens where you're just like, okay, we had that argument, but we made up. I'm just going to try to move forward from it. Because if you linger on it for too long, it's just going to eat you alive.
That's all you can do is continue to move your feet. Life is going to continue to punch you right in the stomach and knock the wind out of you. And you need to continue to move.
And it's going to keep moving. So why wouldn't you keep moving?
Yeah, time doesn't stop.
But unfortunately, time does stop this week. Tune in 2 weeks from now for the rest of this great review.